My name is Agnes He. I'm the director of the Center for Multilingual and Intercultural Communication. Today, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Research Center, and I welcome all of you to participate in this Research Symposium, which marks the culmination of our year-long celebration, which have involved students and the faculty and administrators, both on and off campus. So thank you for being part of this momentous occasion. This afternoon, we begin with our second presentation. And at this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Yi Wang, to come to introduce our distinguished speaker. But first, let me say a few words about Professor Yi Wang. Professor Wang is Assistant Professor of Applied Linguistics with expertise in language ideology, sociolinguistics, and with a particular research sites that include study abroad and other contexts of language and cultures in contact and sometimes in conflict. She's also the principal investigator of a research project on campus that is titled Linguistic Diversity of Stony Brook University. So welcome, Professor Wang.
Thank you. I didn't expect I was getting introduced as well. Good afternoon, everyone. I see there's a lot of students still sitting at the back. Maybe you can take the staircase to see here. And make sure that every seat is filled here. Okay, so again, I'm Yi Wang. I'm from the Department of Asian and Asian American Studies. And I'm really excited to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Guofang Li here. So funny enough, Dr. Li and I recognized each other immediately this morning because we are Facebook friends for So how many of you are still using Facebook? Okay.
There's a generation gap.
So it's always really nice when these online connections turn into real life conversations, right? So Dr. Li is a professor and a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair at the University of British Columbia, where she specializes in exploring the intersections of language and literacy education in our increasingly globalized world. So whether we are talking about bilingualism, biliteracy, teacher education, if it involves language learning and teaching, Dr. Li is asking and answering all these big questions. And let me tell you, her work has some serious impact and reach here. So I'll give you some numbers. Dr. Li has published 19 books. 19 books, yes, 19. So over 200 articles and book chapters, and she's delivered more than 200 talks across the globe. And now finally reached our Stony Brook. And she's being recognized as one of the top 2% of the most cited social scientists and educators worldwide. Her many awards, including the Early Career Award, Mid-Career Award from the American Educational Research Association, and the EdFi Book Award twice. But that's not all. Dr. Li's work continues to shape the future of multilingual education with recent publications like Super Diversity and Teacher Education, and also her forthcoming book, Handbook on Promoting Equity in Education. She's also been an editorial powerhouse, co-editing the Journal of Literacy Research and reviewing for a lot of top-tier journals. So her research isn't just shaping academia, it's changing how we think about language and education across the globe. We are incredibly lucky to have her here today to share her insights. So I won't take too much of your time. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Guofang.
Well, thank you, Professor Wang, for such a wonderful introduction. And also, I'm very honored to be here to celebrate MIC's 10-year milestone. And I want to thank Professor He and the team for the superb organization, hospitality, and everything. Just to just today I realized that I was a member of SUNY system many years ago, about 20 years ago. So I was an assistant professor 20 years ago from 2000 to 2005 at SUNY Buffalo, which was one of your rivalries. And apparently SUNY Buffalo lost already. So anyway, so I'm very pleased to be here. And today I'm going to share some of my ongoing work, which is happening actually still data collection yesterday. So if you were here this morning, and you will not expect singing from me, like Professor Alison Phipps did beautifully. So I'm not going to start by singing, but I will start by explaining what I mean by monolingual habitus and its harm. And I will share the findings from my 2 projects, and share what's ongoing actions that we're working on right now, and then hopefully we have some time for discussion. So what is monolingual habitus? And then many of you, like myself, have experienced this in multilingual schools that are increasingly multilingual. And in the picture this topic is very personal to me. This is my picture of my son and trying to become multilingual and studying Chinese very hard. So at the time he was 8 years old, I was holding his hand, walking towards inside his school, and then my right hand holding him and left hand reaching to the door. And then he said, "Mommy, stop speaking Chinese. It's not allowed here." So this is a school that the majority of the students are from multilingual background. And if you go inside the school, their sign says, "We speak English here, everywhere." So this is very typical of the demographics we're talking about in Canada, if you're not familiar. Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians or 9 million people had a mother tongue other than English, and this is very recent statistics. And 12% Canadians predominantly speak in language other than English and French at home. For those of you who are not familiar with Canada, Canada is a bilingual English and French country. And in the part where British Columbia, where I come from, is mostly English dominant community. And then of course, 9 out of 10 Canadians actually speak one of the 2. You can just see the contrast. You have a lot of people speak a language other than English and French at home, but then most of them also speak English. And in the meantime, the majority of the students are becoming super diverse. So then there's a lot of news report about how students are becoming monolingual in a multilingual country. So you can see that the headlines are losing one's mother tongue in multicultural Canada, the heritage language often lost by 3rd generation, and dozens of indigenous languages in Canada are disappearing. So you can see that there's a contrast from this super diversity that we see every day. There's something undercurrent that's happening. So I return to this concept of habitus. What's the undercurrent? I think there's a monolingual habitus. Habitus, according to Bourdieu, is a set of norms and expectations that people unconsciously acquire, and through the socialization or experience, everyday life, and it's enacted in the world through the body. And it's also it's product of the socialization and is embodiment of the social structure that are reproduced through social practices. And in this social practice, there's also choices, because habitus there are many habituses, and you choose certain habitus to acquire. And also they're reproduced or produced in certain spaces. One of such spaces is schools that I just showed you, that schools are the place where children are socialized in certain beliefs and practices. And so monolingual habitus that I just showed you is really about the deep-seated disposition of monolingualism as the norm. That's what my son was socialized into. And in the context of my study, English monolingualism was the norm. And there are other contexts, the dominant language is different from English. And in my context, English is considered as a lingua franca, where English is the language as a global means of intercultural communication and only the option. So there's no other options. So you can see the sign says we speak English here, meaning we don't speak other language here. So this actually reflects the idea of hegemony of English. Means the superiority of English over other languages. So English is the best and better means of communication. So this kind of habitus actually can cause harm. So I'm showing you that in 1920s, when I'm quoting my colleague, Dr. Lee Ganderson's recent work, how the labeling of English language learners are causing harm. So he did a historical analysis and found that in 1920s, immigrants were classified actually in New York legal documents. They're considered their categories as morons, imbeciles, and idiots, which you can still see sometimes in popular media, right? Or in media, that certain people are saying, referring to immigrants. And in the educational field, they're actually considered lack in intelligence, or they're stupid. And they're considered the ones who are lowering the school achievements scores. And they're stigmatized as racially inferior. And their studies actually show that teachers hold lower expectations and therefore perceptions of their abilities, and which actually cause a lot of shame, anxiety, and fear among students. So in sum, that the intersectional harm is cultural, social, academic, psychological, and of course because it influenced their graduation, influence their college enrollment and future employment, and so it's causing economic harm as well. And on the right of this slide, you can see some of the studies that show. So when the simple labeling the students, immigrant students, as English language learners actually cause substantial negative net impact on math and English language arts test scores in grade 2, 3, grade 10. This is a sample from California, a large sample. And then the second study I'm showing here, that's like academic harm. And the second study said, well, when you looking at learners or look at from the English monolingual habitus, they're considered not enough. So that's causing a lot of psychological stress. And in my own study, which just recently came out, I'm just going to cite one of the teenagers, recently arrived teenagers from China. And I quote, he said, well, people kind of make fun of you if you don't speak fluent English. They don't want to be looked at an ESL one, want to be like normal, implying that if you are not speaking English as your first language, you're not a normal person. And of course, that in other quotes, that in among other teenagers, they use the word stupid, similar language that you can see in other studies. So this intersectional harm is quite deep. So the question is, how do we get there? How do we get here? So I've been asking this question. How are multilingual children being socialized into a monolingual habitus in and out of multilingual schools? So I'm going to share with you some of the findings from my projects. Project number one is as a community school university. So we have 2 universities and a community partnership program. In this is about impact of an after-school reading program on super diverse students' reading motivation and reading engagement. And this was funded by the Canadian government. So the study, actually, the after-school program is hosted in a multilingual school, very typical school, the super diverse population, where this school we call is a pseudonym. We call it Isaac Elementary School. About 600 students. About probably more than 50% of them are English language learners or multilingual learners from diverse background. And this is actually a predominantly Punjabi, Hindi, Tagalog, Filipino, Arabic, and Chinese community. So in this is the first project, is the first iteration of the project. In this particular data set, we included 20 students who are in this program, and we also interviewed 13 parents, and you can see majority of the students are from Punjabi background, and some of them from different parts of the world. And we also interviewed 9 teachers, and there's 10 student volunteers who are local college students, just like many of you. So, and then remember that the volunteers also from a very super diverse background. You can see that 50% of them spoke Punjabi, and others spoke Korean, Spanish, Cantonese, Vietnamese, so they're very, very super diverse. I want to emphasize this because they are also product of a monolingual habitus socialization. And so we did a lot of data collection. We did pre and post of their surveys on their reading motivation. We did semi-structured interviews with students, parents, and teachers, and the volunteers. We also collected students' journals, their work, sample, and recorded a lot of the paired reading and the reading aloud in this program. So we did for our first pre and post on the reading motivation. One thing we noticed very interesting is that there's a numerical decline on, we examined 2 aspects of their reading motivation. One is their self-concept as a reader. So how do they think of themselves as a reader? The second is what they see as the value of reading. So then we found, wait a minute, after this program, they don't see themselves as a better reader, which is really in contrast what we expected. We thought, well, with all this time spent one-on-one reading, or small group reading, all these activities, they should feel better about themselves as readers, but it's different from what we expect. So we start to explore why. So we started to find that, as someone who is very passionate about multilingualism, we found, wait a minute, in all the work samples, you don't see any trace of any cultural backgrounds or their languages reflected. We basically, I think the first round, we collected about 76 of their journals and their drawings, and these are children from multilingual, multicultural background. And we found that except their names, that some of the names can reflect some diversity, in all their works that you don't see any home languages or cultures reflected. So we start to analyze the data from a different lens. So we look at what is going on. I'm going to not delve into the details of how we analyze the data, but I'm happy to talk to you about those boring stuff. But I'll share some of the findings that so what do the teachers think about multilingualism? So what we found is very typical to many teachers in the schools, that they are really holding a lot of transitional bilingualism the ideology, that they actually have this multilingual, those teachers actually, by the way, also multilingual or from multicultural background. So they're thinking that home language is seen as only a tool up to the point where when they are fluent in English, then you don't need that anymore. So that's what we mean by transitional bilingualism, where as soon as you transition to English, functional in English, then you don't need your home language anymore. And they also hold control. They want to control. They have ideas like, because they want them to mainstream into English as soon as they can, so they want to control whether how, when, and what that can be used in the classroom. And another finding we found that there are no resources in multilingualism, or even for that matter, multiculturalism in the school, in the classrooms and in the school. So only a couple of teachers actually encouraged, so remember we've interviewed 9 teachers from very diverse background. Most of them encouraged the parents, say, read to your children, with your children in English, and that's very typical advice. So only a couple of them actually said, oh, we ask parents to read in their language. So this is what teachers think. I think it's very important. Everybody thinks it's important. So this is Miss Tana, who I believe from Punjabi background, say, it's really important to make a connection between their culture and their home languages. So they have an interest in learning, they feel included, they can engage in learning in the classroom. But then another teacher had a similar idea that, I actually speak those languages myself. So a big thing that actually helped as an advantage for me last year was be able to communicate with parents and grandparents in the language myself. But then in the classroom, they know it's important, but then in the classroom, so Mr. Gordon, who is from First Nations or indigenous background, teaches grade 4 and 5, and said, I don't tell them not to, even want them to focus on English, right? So if they're helping someone, it's helpful to use their home language, then I will allow it, meaning that in other times, they are not going to allow them to use their first language. And then other teachers say, I try to get them to speak English, and because something important, and so they translate so they can, but because they have a really, really beginning level. So again, this transitional idea that only when the beginners can use that for translation purposes. And another teacher said, they came here not getting too much exposure to the English language. So we want them to have as much exposure as they can. So the teachers actually, some teachers used, again, this transitional idea, say, I use the tool to translate. So the teacher, the Indo-Anika, say, the new ELs in the classroom to help them translate. When I say something English for them to understand it, I'll repeat it in Punjabi, and then I'll repeat it again in English. So it's really, I've been using that tool since I started. So it's really for beginners to help translate. This is the only occasions then we see that the home language actually used by the teachers. Another teacher actually say, a student speak another language, I don't know, I pull the phone, the Google Translate. Now they ban the phone use in the classroom, and I'm wondering, whoops, what the teacher is going to do. Now there's no phone in the classroom. So there's another student in the classroom speak the same language, I'll use the tool in the classroom as well. So then you can see this lack of resources. And Mr. Gordon, again, say, I don't have any languages or books that are in Punjabi in my classroom. So we said, well, where are the books? Another, Ms. Anu said, well, I don't keep those books in the classroom myself. In the library, there are at least about 2 of those books. But in the library, they do where they are at. They are welcome to use them, but this year my class, I don't need the books because they primarily speak English themselves. So again, you see this transitional, as soon as they can function in English, we don't need that material in my classroom. So last year in my class, I had a few students that were new to the language, so I did borrow some books from the library, and so you can see that this very transitional view of the home language. So then what do we see in the program? So the after school, but just to be clear that we didn't design the program, we came in just natural observation of what's happening, so this program actually as a natural extension of the school program, and really assumes monolingualism really in the program space. So the college volunteers, remember they're multilingual or used to be multilingual themselves. Now many of them actually are monolingual. and there are a few who are still able to speak the language. So they think English only as a goal to achieve rather than a phenomenon to be challenged. So they really goes along with this monolingual habitus. They are aware that because of their own experience of being multilingual once upon in a time or still multilingual, they actually are aware that there's a need to promote multilingualism or languages, but then they said they never practice it. And they also see their role because they came from immigrant background and they struggle, many of them struggled with English early on. So they see their role now, okay, I have achieved in English mastery. Now my role is to help you to do that the same. So this is their goal. They see their role as helping them to achieve English, in a sense, English monolingualism. So again, lack of resources in the program. So you can see from the volunteers' quotes, one volunteer who speaks Spanish as home language say, well, I think the way I see it, because they are being raised, they obviously has English speaking school, so they see the school as English speaking, that their home language wouldn't really necessarily play a part in the English school. And because, would be reading English, right? So we're not really reading in other language. But I think it would make a difference at home with their parents, and their parents, can't speak English or speak broken English. Again, you can see a lot of packed in this statement. Another teacher who spoke, a volunteer who spoke Korean as a home language, say, because they're all comfortable with English and they don't have a problem with the program being entirely in English. That's her view. So they're comfortable, so then why not just use English? I haven't really seen how home language really plays into their motivation to read. So it's really this idea of separation from home language is not really associated with reading at all. So another volunteer said, I can't say that they know a second language or not. I don't know if it really does affect them. So some of them didn't even realize that students actually spoke another language. So then we actually asked, and did you see any like we asked, well, these kids, did you actually attempt to interact with them under any circumstances that this home language is even come into the situation or interaction? And the volunteers, no, there was none. And the student also said, well, it's not really because it's always English, so I don't see any point of using my home language. So you can see that in the oral, in the written, they're all English dominated. So, and then we look at the books that the program selected, and then we actually use Freeman's multicultural rubric, and we found that really, even though the themes are really about inclusivity sometimes, and then stereotypes, and then it's a lot of the themes are about future, about university with second graders. About university, I'm like thinking, I don't talk about university with my kids when they're in second grade. So it's a really different kind of orientation in terms of they see their role, the function of the university volunteers is to act as a role model, say, see, this is what you can achieve. So basically that's the kind of good intention of the program. So we did this rubric analysis, and you can see that the majority of them are not culturally, the books are not culturally relevant, and kids don't see themselves in those books at all because it's all reference to mainstream Western figures or stories and ideals. So this is what one of the volunteers said. When I was a kid, even now a lot of stories, such as they have main characters are predominantly white people, right? So it's hard to see your own culture in it. So then he commented the books that we used in the program. I didn't see any books that has somebody look like me as a main character, right? But I mean, that's just kind of more touching on Western education system in general. I don't know how much it supported their culture, but I feel like the topics that were chosen for the program were good, that they were pretty inclusive. But most of the books I saw kids reach for like white European main characters. So then another volunteer said, well, I think within books there were like two Punjabi books that you can, in the entire school, about Punjabi characters that were really sweet. You know, the term used, very sweet. I think there could be a lot of more options reading for that. So even they're starting to be aware that there needs more multiculturally relevant books. So then we interviewed the volunteer coordinators. The supervisors realized that, I noticed they would bring in their home language in the reading. They started to notice that kids actually have natural desire to connect. And actually among all the 76 samples of work, this is the only one that we saw that actually has a drawing with a turban. So this is the only one we found. So they wanted to make those connections, right? So you can see that they started to be aware that they want, but then they observed the desire, and the volunteers even have the resources. But we didn't really converse in that language. So you see the choices that they made. So when we interviewed Samaran, which was one of these volunteers who actually spoke the language, we're both Punjabi, right? We're both Indian. She asked me a lot of things. And do you like wearing suit? Do you like eating roti? And then all these other cultures. It's because we're from the same culture, and I feel like she's interested in that. She's like, my God, you're like Punjabi as well. That's so cool. But then they said, well, we are the same background. The kids noticed that and asked questions, but we started talking a little bit to us in Punjabi. But then Sabrin said, well, this is happening to many of the volunteers. They say, well, it's from the same culture background, but you know how to speak their language? I said, yeah, I do. But we didn't actually converse in that language. We're just make it known that both of us were able to converse if need to be in that language. So it's there, but let's not use it. So it's a conscious choice. So the volunteers actually think that their role is that I could definitely help them learn English. So back to that role that they assume. So this quote from a volunteer who is 17 years old from Punjabi background. So I personally never grew up in speaking Punjabi. It was always English. So she lost her first language herself. And then she saw her grandparents struggled with English. And then she said, I feel like I could definitely help them learn English now. So their role because of their background. And another volunteer, Samir, who also from Punjab. So to me, my brother and my sister didn't have anyone to teach us English when we grow up. So we're sort of struggling ourselves when we're younger. So now I'm well skilled. I can speak English fluently. I thought it would be a great idea to mentor up other kids that might need help in their English. So again, they take up that English tutor role, and they don't see that their proficiency in other languages that matter. So you can see that from mainstream classrooms, the teachers have transitional bilingualism. The program, after they finish school, they go to after school program, they're reinforced by this English only. And then we are thinking, what about home? What is happening at home? So we start to notice when we interview the parents, we notice that there's language shifts in the home. You can see, and myself even experienced that. So home languages for the parents are for oral communication with adults at home, while English is the only language for literacy activity. So there's a divide between oral language and written language, or reading and literacy and oracy. And parents actually are really lowering their standard. As long as you can speak a little bit, you can understand us, that's enough. And that's all we want. So only one parent actually, out of the 13 parents that we interviewed, reported that their child was capable to read in their home language. And only 2 parents said they read to their children in their language. So, and then we also found that there are very few materials, whether it's online or like in reading materials in the home. And in fact, in one of the families from a Spanish background said, the interviewer asked, so do you have any books in Spanish? They thought for a while and said, wait a minute, we have one book. And then said, where is it? And so the one book was missing in the household. And so you can see the parents, this is some of the parents have very this oral language expectations. So we asked group's mom, so do you read books like your home? No, only read English, only English, because not really Punjabi just to speak. Just to speak, only speaking, just speaking, only understand the English writing words. So you can see the parents are realizing that they're not able to read. But this is very typical. I have a lot of quotes like this, but I'll just show one. So this is very powerful. Say, the parents are starting to be worried because in the beginning they thought, wow, be able to read in English, that's great. And then all of a sudden they realize that they're not speaking in Punjabi anymore, only to speak, but then now not speaking anymore. So Pajat's mother said, he started in Punjabi like 18 months, like he started the Punjabi words. Then we came over here, I put him in preschool, and suddenly everything is changed. He started the English and the Punjabi just go on one side, start talking conversation in English. And he just understand it, and now he replied to us in English. So in some household, they start to notice that not only they only read in English, now they only speak in English. So you can see that it's happening at home. So this is more quote. And then we asked, do you have any materials like this? So if you read only in English, so do you have any materials in Punjabi? We were really referring to any materials, digital, print, and they say, no, never. That they don't have anything in the home to read. So they say, well, we asked, do you want, our research assistant said, well, do you want him to read in Punjabi? Yeah, his speaking is okay, but he doesn't understand the Punjabi story. So implying what's the point, right? So what's the point? So then say, well, would you like him to understand those stories in Punjabi? No, it's fine just to speak Punjabi, so it's okay not to. He can talk with the grandparents, right? When we go back home, he can speak Punjabi with them, right? And it's fine with us, just for that purpose. But then parents, they start to notice that they can't speak Punjabi anymore. So then we ask students, do you speak your language at home or in school? They say, well, one of them said, I only speak English. Okay, so it's not just any English, it's English. So I just speak, this student actually from the Philippines say, I only speak English. I understand my mom's language, so it's not her language anymore. You can see the pronoun reference. I'm English, so I don't usually speak my language. So it's kind of confusing in terms of the linguistic identity, right? So another student, Elise, we said, well, my parents usually speak Amharic, and I only know a few words. So we said, well, how do you usually talk with your family? Do you talk in English? So yeah, but when my parents say something in Amharic, it's just like, I don't understand. Then so I said, how do you understand? I just look at the emotions they're doing, and then after I know what they're saying. So it's just guessing. So you can see the language shifts in the home, and So then we ask kids, do you want to learn your language, right? And so the students say, no, not ever. I don't want to learn. So you can see they're socialized into monolingual habitus. So then we asked that some students haven't made that kind of definite decision yet. They're only in 2nd to 5th grade. So we asked some of them, said, well, do you want to learn? And say, not yet. I'll learn, I don't know. But just not yet, it takes too much time. So again, it's not deciding whether they want to learn their language. So you can see that from the mainstream school, after school program, in the home, this undercurrent of monolingual habitus is circulating and is shaping students' language future, right? They're making decisions, they're making choices now. And they're only in 2nd to 5th grade. The majority of them are in 2nd and 3rd grade. So then I'm going to share another study that I'm not going to go into details. And this is actually on the Chinese community in Vancouver, where we included 208 bilingual children who are in grade 1, kindergarten to grade 3. So it's a longitudinal study. And we actually surveyed and interviewed 208 of the students' parents. This study was done during the pandemic, so many of the studies were conducted online. And we also actually interviewed and surveyed both mainstream school teachers and heritage language school teachers, so it's quite a big study. Again, this study was funded by the Canadian, the Social Science Humanities Research Council of Canada. And so you can see that we asked the parents, so why don't you rank the importance of the language? You can see that in their ranking, the majority of them ranked English, 91% of them ranked English as the most important. And the part, because the British Columbia, as I mentioned, is an English dominant province, so French is not really, actually not used at all in public spaces. So French is not very important here. And you can see that majority of them, only half of them, less than half, 40% of them actually think that their home languages are important. And this is even lower among Cantonese-speaking parents, who are only 16% of them saying that's important. So you can see that the majority of the parents actually have a language hierarchy already inherited in their thinking, in their ideology, and it's English as superior to other languages. So this is many quotes. For those of you who can read Chinese, I challenge you to read. So we asked them about their bilingual studies. They say, we worry about English. But not their Chinese. It's not that Chinese is great, but they're not just worried about, it's just like the Punjabi parents. They're not worried about the Punjabi, they're worried about the English. So I'm more worried about English. I just want them to read English well. I only require them to speak and speak Chinese and read Chinese a little bit. Like sometimes if you can read your name, that's enough. That kind of very low expectations. So, and then similar to the other group that we studied, there's a huge language shift at home. And you can see that he wanted to use English when he switched to English when he started kindergarten. So same story, right? He said, this is in another part of the town. So I gave up, right? So, and then, so we asked him, well, do you actually try to speak, what language do you speak at home? English. We tried to use Chinese, but then it's almost the metaphor that if you are reading Chinese, this metaphor say, it's almost like he switched off and he can't receive the signals. It's just if you speak Chinese to them. And so then we say, well, is that 90% in English? And I said, oh, and then the father, 44, said, for him is 100% in English. He's very resistant to Chinese, and basically, actually, the conversation continues. Say, if they started to speak Chinese, and he started to get mad, So it just So what is the academic consequences? So we did the quantitative part. We did the mixed method study. This is a 3-year longitudinal. You can see that. So the children started with, and you can guess which one's Chinese, which line is English, right? So English, despite the pandemic, during the pandemic, it went going uptrend. And the Chinese actually started with very good Chinese when they started the grade 1, year 1, grade 1. And in year 3, they are dropped way to the bottom. So you can see that in 3 short years, that the status or their ability in Chinese and in English totally switched, right? So this is how the success of monolingual habitus, I would say. So I'm all very gloomy now. So I'm trying to cheer you up. So how do we do this? How do we change it, right? So the point of doing this research is to see how we can really dismantle the monolingual habitus. And in research literature, there are many metaphors to refer to this monolingual habitus. It's called a wall, whatever, like firewall. So we are many metaphors that are used to say is unbreakable, but we're trying to break it. So what we did is that we are try to change the mindset. Is really from like a concept of being multilingual is from inability, incompetence, or burden, or shame, or from a linguistically deficient to monolingualism as a gift, right? It's beautiful, or it's actually more than a lot of people can have in the majority of the world. And monolingual should be seen as linguistically gifted, right? So the second thing we need, not only the changing mindset part is actually very hard, because you're really dealing with a lot of beliefs, years of or centuries of socialization in that. But we need to change teachers. We can train teachers. So remember, we surveyed the teachers. What we found is that the majority of the teachers, for example, in our 63 mainstream teachers, I was really shocked that about 44% of them never had any education or background in multicultural education or bilingual education. That's shocking. And the majority of them, or some of them, actually had 1 or 2 courses. That's it in their entire, So, and then I have more of those showing that they have many of them, 10 of them, had no background in EL or education theory or method at all. So this is shocking. They are teaching multilingual, super diverse learners without proper training. Of course, we have to do policy changes, because just relying on teachers is not enough. We need to build better school-home partnerships. We need to really raise parental awareness, because a lot of immigrant parents are living in fear that if they are not good in English, they're going to have no future. So we need to have also raise students' awareness agency. We need to provide more material resources that are culturally and linguistically relevant. So in our very famous Canadian researcher, Jim Cummins, actually back in 10 years ago, said that there's no policy to support heritage language education in Canada, despite it's a bilingual education, but bilingual education in the dominant languages. He said, all provinces strongly support the learning of the second official language They also provide support to newcomer students to learn the language of school instruction, but few have developed coherent policies regarding the multilingual realities of schools and communities. So even though it's 10 years ago, still STEM. So we did continue after we discovered the problem, we continued to our research. We did actually try to instill a plurilingual habitus in the program. So this is what we did. So very brief. So we decided to redesign the program from a social historical activity lens. So what we did is that we changed the rules of engagement in the program. So before it's only English was allowed. Now we're saying you can use your first language. We actually, in every single activity, we say, kids, please use your language when you can. It's either written or spoken or any means. Another aspect we did is that we actually changed the tools. The tools in the activity theory is the medium where kids engage in activities. So what we did, we used arts-based, multimodal, multilingual, cultural books and art activities to promote multilingualism. We also we actually did intervention. So in the activity system, the division of labor, which means like what members do in this system. So we asked the college volunteers, say, please use your language. Our researchers there too said, model the use of your first languages, initial conversations, and we actually make every volunteer mandatory training of multilingualism module that we created. So they have to do that before they go into the volunteering. So in the second iteration, so we did volunteer training, we did a theme-based, the themes are much more cultural relevant, so we don't talk about university and future and create that kind of fear of anxiety. And we use cultural relevant books, and we use multimodal, multicultural, multilingual journal activities. And we did a lot of arts-based activities, and you can see that we have language portraits, poems, name poems, hijab design, migration maps, which is online. They have option to do it digitally. We may ask them to make identity scarves and cultural collages and design prayer rugs. So then we actually see changes in student engagement. You remember in the first iteration that student self-concept as reader really went down. So what we found is that actually students start to bring in their languages and cultures, and they actually share more of their language culture. A case example is that our research assistants was just have a regular interview with two of the kids about one of their artwork. The student talked for an hour, and they still didn't want to stop about their religious practices, the books they read, and the kind of prayers they did. So it really eye-opening even to our research assistants that the kids wanted to share that much. They also showed a deeper connection with reading, and they also have close bonding with volunteers. Now they're much more closer relationship. So I want to show with some of the work, like you can see that they're embracing multiple identities and languages. And sorry, it's a little bit small, but you can see compared to the artwork, the student work before, that you can't see any culture in there. You see multiple languages. You see actually they bring in even their religious practices. And you can see, I want to show you this, sorry. This particular artwork is written in Punjabi. It actually says big words and so the student said, That's my goal this year, is to learn bigger words in Punjabi. So you can see that students are motivated to use their languages and bring in their cultures. And we have a lot of more examples to show. And it's coming in our upcoming paper that's under review. These are all. So anyway, in conclusion, that you can see that there's a shared similar monolingual habitus towards children's, actually shared similar towards actually not sustaining students' multilingual practices. The monolingual ideologies were systemically reproduced across different spaces. But our study shows that we can actually disrupt these language ideologies and practices and to foster a more inclusive multilingual learning environment. So here's some resources that I shared with, I don't know whether you received it or not, but this is some of the resources of what, if you're going to be tutoring or teaching kids in the school, this is what you can read, and there's many useful tips. I want to conclude by quoting Logi's words that if you know all the languages of the world and you do not know your mother tongue and the language of your culture, that is self-enslavement. Knowing your mother tongue and all languages is empowerment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Did Chicago ask me to use the mic?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Oh, can I get the... Yes, sorry. Sorry. Okay, thank you, Dr. Li, for the presentation. I was given the job by Agnes to talk about 5 to 10 minutes to provide some insightful comments. So Dr. Li's research on the monolingual habitus really shines a spotlight on how multilingual children are often socialized into monolingualism, even in environments that outward appear very diverse, right? And it's really an honor to engage with Dr. Li's work, especially because it aligns with our ongoing efforts here, led by MIC at Stony Brook University, to promote linguistic justice. So now, before I get into my reflections, I want to share a really quick story. My 18-month-old son is now in daycare, and I was so happy to find out that the teacher volunteers actually speak Mandarin. And there was a quote in your presentation that I feel like I can definitely help him to learn the home language. And that's exactly what the teacher volunteer said to me. So it gives me hope that he's growing up in an environment that multiple languages are used, but at the same time, as Dr. Li points out, the reality can be very challenging, right? So that's something that I'm going to think even more after this presentation. So one of the key takeaways of Dr. Li's presentation is this persistence of the monolingual habitus, the deeply ingrained norms that privilege English even in the multilingual schools and programs. And teachers and volunteers here, with this best intention, often prioritize English over students' home languages, and this practice of transitional bilingualism limits the use of heritage languages to supporting English learning rather than valuing them as the core to the linguistic identities, to student identities. So these issues are not confined to just the K-12 education. At Stony Brook, we have this linguistic initiative, diversity initiative. We've seen similar challenges in higher education as well, while multilingual students often feel pressured to downplay their linguistic identities to fit into these English-dominant academic and professional spaces. These show how the monolingual ideologies can permeate all levels of education, right? Reinforcing the English dominance while siloing our other languages in this process. So the presentation also reveals the emotional toll that these ideologies can have on students, this feeling of shame, anxiety, and disengagement. At the college level also, as the multilingual students express concerns about they're seen as less competent when using their home languages. This speaks to the broader hegemony of English, where non-English languages are often viewed as less valuable or relevant. So we also see the highlights on how the ideologies intersect with the cultural identities. The many parents internalizing these norms, focusing on English for literacy while relegating the home languages to informal use. That also mirrors what Dr. Joy Jensen led for the Stony Brook stories, where the students often feel their home languages are only valued in private or informal use, if they're valued at all. So this is a challenge we must face together, as it affects both how students perceive themselves and how they engage with their education. So the changing ingrained monolingual habitus is no easy task, but as Dr. Lee has shown us today, it's not impossible, and it starts with some key efforts. And the first one is the teacher preparation and training. As Dr. Lee emphasized that, the need to equip educators with the right tools and mindset to create this inclusive and multilingual environment. And also the policy and institutional support. Right? Both the Dr. Lee's work and our initiatives at Stony Brook highlight the importance of the institutional policies that promote linguistic inclusion. So we have, for those of you who attend the morning session, we have the promise from the Dean Robo this morning, right? So I hope that we really can collaborate together to continue making impact for the next decades. In closing, Dr. Lee's presentation challenges us to rethink our approach to language in education. So moving from a monolingual habitus to a prolingual habitus requires more than policy changes. It demands a deeper transformation on how we understand language, power, and identity in education. So how we teach as educators and how we understand languages has real-world consequences for how students see themselves and their place in the world. And before I end, I hope to really talk about several questions, not for just Dr. Lee and the audience, but the questions that I'm always thinking about when I think about this topic. So given that the monolingual ideologies are often tied to these broader social and political structures, what kind of strategies can we use to challenge these ideologies in the environment that resist to change? And how do we actually advocate the prolingualism in the context that English still remains linked to the social mobility and the success? And also, Dr. Lee, you have shown that these norms shape students' linguistic identities. How can us as our educators intervene effectively when students themselves have these internalized hierarchies? And more importantly, is there a risk of unintentionally reinforcing these ideologies if we're not careful as educators? And I'm happy that I see a lot of familiar faces because I brought my class of China language and culture to this session. So I want to raise some questions for the students here. Like, how do you think, after this session, how do you think that your own assumptions about language, identity, and success might be shaped by monolingual ideologies? And more importantly, how can we reimagine language learning as a way to celebrate and sustain linguistic diversity rather than as something that reinforcing conformity? So with that, I'll stop before I exceed the time. And thank you again to Dr. Lee for this valuable presentation. And I'm now like to open the floor for your thoughts and reflections and questions. Yes.
I'm not a student, so I won't take too much.
I think
I'm very familiar with these topics because we faced it in Scotland as well. And through our public engagement center, Bilingualism Matters, we try to address these questions. So we try to talk to students, talk to teachers, talk to parents, so that both languages are valued. Because we often come across in a situation where parents tell us, our child doesn't want to speak our language anymore, they only want to speak English, what are we supposed to do? And we try to say, try to continue to speak your language, accept that your child, may not want to speak your language for a while, but don't create a negative, a tense environment, because that doesn't do any good. And I just wanted to say another thing. We did a study a few years ago where we compared more multilingual classrooms with less multilingual classrooms, and everybody had to learn a new language. And we found that, the monolingual English children in more multilingual classrooms that value multilingualism in some of the ways that you described actually did better in learning another language. So, so there are many advantages, beyond the ones that are immediately obvious.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Yeah.
So I have a question for you about the data, which I'm curious about. Do you know the generation with respect to migration of these families, of those children, and also those teachers? Because here, and I teach both Italian American studies, what I see, not just with Italian Americans, but with the students who come to my classes, is that the dynamics of shame and desire change as the generations change. And so I then find students later on in the second, third generation whose luggage and baggage is about the regret for not having learned, the regret for not having maintained themselves. So that's the question. And then one comment, and that's that I'm thinking of Alison this morning talking about the counting of languages. And for me, it's really important that when we're talking about this, it's not just about English. Yes, English may be hegemonic in the context of talk, but this applies to the teaching of any languages. If we reinforce that monolingual model, when we teach Italian, when we teach Spanish, when we teach Punjabi, we are still in the same trap of counting languages.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comments and questions. The first question, the majority of the parents are first-generation immigrants. So some children are 1.5, and some were born in Canada. And however, these parents are still worried about English. However, one of my students did collect data on second-generation parents who how their life's history influenced their choices for their children's language. And exactly the same story, because they didn't learn it. Now they want to fight for the few spots where they can get into a bilingual school. So they're influencing their decision they say, well, I didn't learn, so now I want you to learn. But then they're receiving resistance. So their children say, well, you didn't learn, why do I have to learn, right? So that's the kind of battle that parents are facing. So the first generation have their own battles in this. But the common is, the theme is that resistance among children, even when I observed one of my son's heritage language class, as soon as the bell rang or the teacher announced that the class is over, the student said, oh my God, the torture is over. and so the reason is that, there are many reasons, is that the heritage language schools usually operate under volunteer teachers who didn't have training. They use very culturally irrelevant teaching methods to children who grew up in a Western style of learning. So a lot of times that they use text-based approach, teacher-fronted approach that doesn't connect with children's learning style. And there's a lot of homework that requires a lot of copying that young children are not used to in the school. They're often homework with reading a book rather than copying one character 1,000 times, right? So there's a lack of professional development. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to that resistance. So, forgot your second question.
It was more a comment than a question, but about that way in which we need to think about this, not just for English.
Oh, yes, yes.
Teaching all languages.
Yeah.
Otherwise we teach new languages and we're reinforcing that knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's really not about teaching languages in the school. It's about the legitimate place, like as a part of students' identities, that we shouldn't have signs in the school saying we only speak, as soon as you get into the space, you shut down who you are as part of your life. Like my son basically said, don't bring any other language into this space, as if that's like contained, like another language will actually affect their English learning, which research already showing that it only helps, not really detrimental. That's another aspect of teacher training, right? They need to have that that kind of training. And I'm just going to share a story I brought a group of teachers, pre-service teachers, teacher candidates into that school space. So we had all this wonderful teaching about multilingualism and in their class, how to build on students' multilingual repertoire. And then they walk into space, they saw the signs of we speak English everywhere, and they were shocked. So one of the students asked me, "What should I ask this question?" I said, "Yes, go ahead." So then the student asked the principal, "So why do you have these signs everywhere in the classroom?" And the answer, but I was going to make you guess, but anyway, just for the sake of time, most of us thinking is for academic reasons, right? It's because the staff did not speak any other languages. They don't understand when the children were talking. So my students were really shocked by this response. It's not because at least they want to help them with learning English. That's a good intention. The sole reason for those signs there is because the staff, the teachers couldn't understand what students were talking about. So that was the pedagogical decision was built on. So this is the kind of reality we're working against, right? So there are many challenges. So it's not really about teaching a specific language. It's about whether you think those languages are legitimate or part of the students' idea. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So a lot of teachers think that, or think if I don't know any other languages, then I don't allow that in the classroom, right? So that's the kind of power we're going against. Oh, yeah.
I think we don't have a lot of time, but we have the coffee break right across the hall, so we can continue the conversation while the girls are
Sorry, there was one hand.